This is Michael Popok. Things are going so bad for Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, that even a GOP Republican-led House investigating committee has recommended 20 articles of impeachment against him. For those that don't know, Ken Paxton does all the bidding for Greg Abbott and every major law in Texas that you don't like, including SB 8, the abortion bounty hunting law on the books, anything against transgender people, anything against LGBTQ plus community, anything against immigration and immigrants into Texas comes out of the witch's brew of Ken Paxton, who, by the way, I learned today his real first name is Warren Kenneth Paxton, because it's on the articles of impeachment. There are 20 of them. And what is so amazing about it is not that time seems to be running out finally for Ken Paxton, who's already under a separate criminal indictment for securities fraud that's been pending since 2015. You think the wheels of justice against Donald Trump move slowly? There's a 7 or 8 year indictment that's hanging over the head of Ken Paxton, the twice elected Attorney General for the state of Texas. Talk about that next. Let's get right to the heart of the matter on my hot take. What's going on, and how did the Republicans get enough votes to recommend the impeachment in the House, the Texas House of Representatives, against Ken Paxton? And what's it for? Well, if you read the 20 articles of impeachment that are recommended by this House Investigating Committee, General Investigation Committee, we'll put it up on the screen during my hot take. It comes down to bribes that Ken Paxton is alleged to have received, false statements that he made on official documents related to it, and abuse of public trust, and everything else. It kind of centers around one particular donor to Ken Paxton's campaign and the incestuous nature of the relationship involving Paxton and that donor, an Austin, Texas real estate developer who also hired a person who Ken Paxton had a relationship with and put her on the payroll. And then you've got all the things related to Ken Paxton paying out $3.3 million of Texas taxpayer public money to settle cases of retaliation brought by people in his office who claims that when they complained about his bribery, unethical conduct, lack of public trust, he fired them. And then he used public money to cover that up. That's also in the recommended articles of impeachment. And continuing the incestuous nature of all of these allegations, I just told you about a woman with whom Paxton is alleged to have had a relationship with. He's also married, and he's married to a state senator. He's married to Angela Paxton, one of 31 members of the Texas State House. And impeachment works the same way fundamentally as it does at the federal level for people like Donald Trump and presidents and elected officials and judges. The articles of impeachment are now recommended by this House committee in Texas. This Texas House committee based it on presentations by the Texas investigators. It's like the Bureau of Investigation for Texas, who came in and presented all of their evidence to this 5-person subcommittee or committee, investigative committee, during the time that the Texas House was in session. Doesn't meet all the time. It's currently in session. There's 3 members of the panel that are Republican. There are 2 members that are Democrat, and they recommended on a majority vote that these 20 articles of impeachment be brought against Ken Paxton, the elected Attorney General for Texas. What happens next? It then has to go to the floor of the House of Texas for a vote. If they're in session, which they are just for another day, it can be done during the session. Whether they can get it all up in time on the day before the Memorial Day weekend to get the articles of impeachment voted on, to have him actually impeached, I think is pretty slim chance, which means they'll have to call a special session back of the Texas House to vote particularly on the articles of impeachment. Paxton would have the opportunity to present his own evidence. I mean, what he was doing during the vote by the committee was he was sitting alone with his lawyer in a conference room next door with like nobody present, 1 or 2 pool reporters, railing against the vote. But he'll have an opportunity, if it's done on the House floor, to present his evidence. It'll be like a trial, like we saw during the Trump impeachments, by the House. But then the House has to vote on that. Now we have an interesting dichotomy or split of party, and even within the Republican Party between MAGA, Trumpers, and just plain old Republicans about how to handle this. In the House Speaker of the House is Dade Phelan or Phelan. Dade Phelan is a conservative, but not a Trumper, and is sort of against all things, has been against all things related to Ken Paxton, who's on the MAGA supreme right-wing cultist of Donald Trump, and Greg Abbott, the governor. So you have that tension. So you got the House Speaker, who's Republican but not MAGA, but the head of the state Senate, where the conviction would have to be, right? The House impeaches. That's like indictment. The Senate of Texas, 31 members, convicts, right? So that is led by Dan Patrick, who's the majority leader of the Texas Senate, and he's a Trumper. And Paxton's wife, not the girlfriend that was on the payroll of the donor, but his actual wife, Angela Paxton, is a state senator who doesn't have to recuse herself. So she's one of 31 votes. So all this is playing out on a national stage covered by media like this one, only on the MeidasTouch network, with me providing these hot takes. But this is going on in real time leading up to Memorial Day weekend against Ken Paxton. Now, Ken Paxton, besides being the architect of SB 8 against a woman's right to choose and setting up a bounty law for people to turn in their neighbor and get paid for doing so, and deputizing other Texans to go against women and people who help women get abortions, right? Which has been a foundation for other anti-abortion laws passed by, right-wing MAGA legislators all over America. He's also the subject of his own criminal indictment. People probably forget because it was like 8 years ago. But Ken Paxton is currently indicted by a county near Dallas, Collin County in Texas, for securities fraud, including everything that he did while he was in the House, the very House that may impeach him. He was a member of the House before he ran for Attorney General of the state of Texas. And while he was in the House, he had a side gig and a side business in securities, stocks and bonds and things, where he got investors to put in almost $500,000 or more into a energy company without telling them that he was getting a commission for all the money that was being invested. And that is a securities fraud crime in the state of Texas, punishable up to let me get the exact amount, 5 to 99 years in prison for doing that in the state of Texas. That's still going on. So he's been under that as the chief legal officer of the state. Things are screwed up in Texas. Let's just say it on my hot take, okay? The fact that your chief legal officer is criminally indicted for securities fraud at the same time he's using public taxpayer dollars to pay off people who claim that they were retaliated against and fired because they tried to call out his bribery and cover-up scandal. And his wife, but not his girlfriend, sits in the Texas Senate that holds his I was going to say something rude, but holds his impeachment conviction in their hands, and she doesn't have to recuse herself, while you have a battle between Republicans, but not MAGA Trump Republicans, between the House and the Senate in the state of Texas, as it plays out against, is the House in session or not in session, which determines when the articles of impeachment would be voted on. Look, say what you want. He has fallen into a deep witch's brew that is now on fire against Ken Paxton. Can he survive the indictment? I mean, he's kept it at bay for 8 years. Can he survive a Republican recommended 20 count articles of impeachment? We'll see. Only if he can get the House to either not consider it or not vote in favor of the committee's recommendations. And even if he loses there, he's got the Senate probably under his thumb, and we'll see what we saw with Donald Trump, which is he gets impeached twice or once, but doesn't get convicted and removed from office. And then the voters of Texas are going to have to decide whether they want this sort of morally, ethically compromised attorney general to be their attorney general. I mean, I'm sure there's a recall process in the state of Texas if they could get enough votes to get him out of office and stop being embarrassed by having your chief legal officer be your chief criminal. That's where we are right now. I'm covering it on Hot Takes just like this one, but only on the MeidasTouch network. When I'm not a practicing lawyer and trial lawyer nationally, I'm also the co-founder and co-anchor of the leading political and legal podcast. It's on the MeidasTouch network. It's called Legal AF. We do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays. You can see it on YouTube. You can pull it off of anything that's audio where you pull your podcast from, any platform. We're all on it. If you like what I'm doing here on this content, on this YouTube, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment, and I'll respond back to you. And you can follow me at all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.